artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hello, welcome to episode 284. I'm talking with Bruce Schneier and Nathan Sanders, authors of a new book, Rewiring Democracy: How AI Will Transform Our Politics, Government, and Citizenship. Yes, this is about AI in the halls of power. Bruce is a famous security technologist and best-selling author of 14 books, including Data and Goliath and A Hacker's Mind. He's a lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School and a board member of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Nathan is a data scientist researching machine learning, astrophysics, public health, environmental justice, and more. He has served in fellowships and the Massachusetts legislature and the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard University. You can read him in publications like The New York Times and The Atlantic. Last week, we talked about our emotional reaction to the idea of AI in governing, of AI being used in making legislation, the concept of democracy as an information system, ways AI can transform how citizens engage their governments, regulatory responses to AI from the US and around the world, and how the judicial branch can use AI. This week, we're going to talk about whether wealthy entities might subvert the use of AI in democracy, how smaller countries are engaging with AI in government, the utility of open weight and open source models, digital twins in government, and the future of surveillance, and what makes Bruce and Nathan optimistic about the future. So let's get back into the interview with Bruce Schneier and Nathan Sanders. One of the things that you explore in the book is about government having its own models, either developing, building, or in some other way sanctioning a particular model. How likely is it, or what path does government have to go down to get a model that works for government and is as sufficiently capable?
We do think it is interesting and important that governments play a role in AI development, and in some cases to have AIs that are wholly developed, produced, maintained, and served from the public sector, what we call public AI. The reason why we think this is important is that today, most of the AIs that we interact with in our day-to-day lives are made by corporation, and in particular, a very small number of very powerful, very wealthy corporation. Especially in the last few years, there's just been a remarkable concentration of power and wealth in that big tech sector, mostly in the United States, and that seems to be increasing in a way that's worrisome, I think, for democracy, whether we're talking about technology or any other sector of the economy. So we think it's important that government play a more active role in shaping the AI ecosystem. Regulation is one way to do that, but directly participating in AI development is another way. It's similar to in the healthcare sector. Government can regulate what private insurers do and how private healthcare providers deliver services. But in other contexts, governments can also directly play that role in providing services. There are great examples around the world of governments that are actively developing their own AI model explicitly for the public interest and the public benefit, producing them as open source products that are made available for the public good as public goods. One of the first examples is from Singapore, a project called Sea Lion. And one of the most recent examples just released in the last few weeks is in Switzerland, that now has produced its own fully open source, open in code, open in data AI model. And we'd like to see more of that happen around the world.
I remember the introduction of the internet. In fact, I was in college when they switched over to TCP/IP, so I go back that far. And so I remember the internet as preceding the World Wide Web, which is what most people think of as the internet. But then when the web explosion took place, there was a lot of ink spilled about how democratizing it was. And it was at that time, because anyone could set up a website and anyone could find it and view it and didn't have to pay differential access charges to get there. That still exists. We still have that, but it seemed to me, following that over the ensuing 20 years or so, that the corporations and other bodies that had large amounts of money to spare spent it on gaining leverage that their money would buy them, that people without it couldn't. And to large extents, they have gotten that. And we can see that in some of the big platforms now, and it showed, I think, most notably in social media. Now we're at another democratizing moment where AI is exploding, and we can point to how democratizing it is for the people who have access to it. How do you think this might play out with the role of big actors with big pockets looking at how they can gain leverage?
So I write about this, and I write about what I call the quick versus the strong. And whenever there's a new technology, the first adopters tend to be the dissidents, the criminals, the underclass, and they use it for their own ends. And that was the internet. That was social media, the color revolutions of 20 or so years ago. The strong are slower, but when they adopt it, they end up being more powerful. These technologies are magnifiers of power. And, when the quick use it, suddenly they get access to power. When the strong eventually use it, they have more raw power to magnify. So I think we're going to see that same trend. We're starting to see it actually very quickly because the tech monopolists from the previous generation, from social media, are the ones who are moving into AI. So they're already strong and powerful. This technology could go differently. A lot of it will depend on how easy it is to create your own model. Hundreds of millions of dollars to create a core model, I think is going to be quaint in a couple of years. Right now, there are 2 million, literally 2 million public domain models on Hugging Face, AI models. That's a lot. Last time I looked, which was less than a year ago, there were 1 million. So there's a lot of things happening outside the corporate giants, but you can't discount the empire, right? They're really good at using technology, and it's hard for the Rebel Alliance to gain a foothold. That happens in the movies more than in real life, really, unless we build the ecosystem to favor the democratization of the tech.
And going with that metaphor there, if we're thinking of some of the backwaters of the galaxy, where you've got the poorer planets that have to govern themselves and manage with far less trade, in our world, we focus a lot of our thinking here naturally on the forefront of where these changes take place, North America, for instance, and those are very large governments and systems. But we've got 200 countries around the world, much smaller, that could look at AI as being an enabling technology for assisting them in their own governance, basically making it cheaper and easier to run their countries without the kind of superheated controversy and attention that is being focused on this in the larger countries. Can you see them perhaps leading the way in the innovation of this as being places that experiment with it because they can get away with it?
I think we absolutely should expect that. And I think part of the innovation is local adaptation. To build off of what Bruce said a moment ago and to draw back to that example from Singapore, the history of that project to develop a Singaporean AI, the Sea Lion project, is really instructive here. The very first version of the model that they brought to the public were built and trained entirely by their team. Over time, however, they switched to a different model where they were leveraging open source models, or at least open weight models published by big tech companies, Meta, for example, and then doing fine tuning on them, adapting them for their local use case, training them with more data that is local to Southeast Asian languages and towards use cases of public administration that are relevant for their government. I think that's absolutely within the scope of what many even smaller governments can do. And as Bruce was saying, over time, the barrier to entry for that kind of model adaptation is getting lower, not higher.
You mentioned open weight there, the distinction between open weight and open source. I think that's worth a quick engineering dive because publishing the weights of a model makes it look very open and you can use it. But as far as I know, you can't change it. It's a billion numbers that are meaningless. I don't know whether there's any transparency in there, what sort of work has been done to be able to discover from the weights what it means. Otherwise, it looks like just a whole set of numbers that do something emergently, but are otherwise completely opaque. Just looking at this through that open source lens, what do you think the future of open weight models is?
Yeah, let's start with the technology there and then zoom out a little bit to the societal impact. One of the interesting things about these artificial neural network architectures and transformer models is that actually with the open weight models, with just that effectively a huge matrix of numbers as you're describing, you actually can modify and change those models. You can fine tune them on further data. You can adapt them for specialized use cases. And so the example that I mentioned from Singapore a moment ago is a real world example of governments doing that, building on top of open weight models, even though they don't have access to the original data and not even all the original training source code. So it is possible, but I would argue that it's not sufficient for the type of public benefit that we would like to create with AI. What that does allow you to do is understand all the training data that was used to create that model and what biases it might introduce or what gaps it may have versus the capabilities that you would like your model to have. It gives you limited insight into how that model may behave in new situations and scenarios. It gives you limited control over the responsible development of that model, whether, for example, the training data was licensed properly or, effectively stolen from someone. What values were encoded in that model and how they may arise when you're using that model in different situations in the future. To have that much greater level of control and certainty when, for example, a small government is trying to adapt a model, you need more than just the weights. You do need a fully transparent model that is open, at least in the data, the source code, and the weights. And I think even better, sort of the philosophy and how the model is developed and its design process. So the example I mentioned from Switzerland earlier is an example of a government that's trying to be open across all of those dimensions and then to provide that model to publish it as a public good, both for use within their country, but also potentially as a starting point for other actors.
Thanks. I really appreciate the distinction there. One of the ways in which you've made me think more broadly and some bigger thoughts is that digital twin is a concept now that's hot as a phrase, especially in business, making a digital twin of some market, for instance. It's a buzzword for a simulation. But it made me wonder whether you could make a digital twin of a democracy. And you do talk about modeling different parts of the system there. So I wonder whether the possibility of making a digital twin of a democracy, or if that's too big, start with something a bit smaller like a corporate governance, what road that might lead down.
Yeah, it might be too big, at least to start. One of the things we talk about in the book is AI being used to assist in passing legislation, to devise a strategy to get legislation passed. And that would be, I don't like the term digital twin, simulating the legislature, the legislators, what their wants and likes and dislikes, and maybe what their electorate looks like, and figuring out who are the people that need to be influenced and how they might be influenced. So there's an example of that done at a smaller level. And that's nothing human legislative assistants don't do today, but that would bring that capability to a greater number of people. So there's an example of using a simulation of a human process to try to give you as a human insight into what you might need to do to influence that process.
I can add to that one of the places where Bruce and I have gone from the theoretical to the practical and applied and experimental is in what we call AI polling, using artificial agents to anticipate what a broader public would think about a policy issue and topic. We've tested the capabilities of current large language models to accurately represent what real human constituents have said in response to polling questions across a wide variety of issues and a wide variety of demographics, particularly in the US context. And we've seen some cases where AI is able to really, with some good accuracy, represent what different diverse publics think about important topics, and also cases where it goes spectacularly wrong. I think that gap will close over time. We talk about ways that we think the technology will evolve to make it more accurate and more representative of people's opinion. And as that happens, it's interesting to think about how political actors like candidates, legislators, and politicians will leverage that capability to understand a broader public in their own work.
Are there any specific reforms that you think would smooth the way to that kind of process, like term limits?
I was thinking of a technical piece here. So I think what's really important to make AI effective in serving that role is making sure that it has context. Of course, that can be one of the most challenging things for an artificial agent. It's not walking around in the real world. It's not experiencing all of the stimuli and inputs that we all have as humans and as constituents of a democracy. But to the extent to which we can provide that context to an AI model, we can give it access to what is in the news today, to what is important to each different community that we're trying to simulate. I think it is possible to make it more representative of how people within those communities would react.
When people look at the trends that are at the intersection of technology and society and governance, the prospect of us moving into an even greater surveillance state seems to loom pretty large. I was just reading Reid Hoffman's Super Agency, and he has one of the more optimistic takes on that. And that seems something that's going to accelerate, going to become more widespread no matter what happens. Let's say, no one likes the term surveillance state. I don't think you would get many people checking the box, sounds like a good idea, on a poll of that. But that's a label, and some of the aspects of that are ones that we find appealing. So if we take the label off it, but still look at the way that that technology is happening, with obviously all of the attendant risks, and again, numerous dystopian movies to its credit, what do you think the proper role of AI is in ensuring that whatever happens with increasing surveillance, it isn't to our detriment?
And I'm afraid to say it probably will be to our detriment. What AI does is it allows for looking through conversations, texts, at a way that was not possible before. So pre-AI, we had bulk surveillance. We couldn't listen in on your phone conversations because that took a person, but we could get a record of who you spoke to. And that kind of surveillance of who you spoke to, where you went, what you purchased, it was all in databases. It was all searchable and analyzable by computers. What wasn't analyzable is what you said. AI can change that. Suddenly, with AI, we can get analysis of everything you said. And that's pretty dystopian. I don't think there's any way around that except like making that illegal, which isn't going to happen in some countries ever, and in other countries no time soon. So I actually think the surveillance possibilities of AI are going to be dystopian for a while.
No, that's forewarned is forearmed. To wrap up with a few smaller topics here, still on my list here, one of the things in US government that's again coming in for a lot more attention is redistricting. And one can imagine algorithms that take the partisan nature out of that. A friend of mine outlined a very simple one that is very computer sciencey. You start at the top left corner of the state, grow the district until you've got the number of people that you want in it, then move to the right and do it again. So AI could make that better, easier, faster, and take care of some of the problems that might happen with that, like where the boundaries got drawn, being inconvenient. But is that an example of the kind of thing where you'd like to see us turn over the reins to AI?
So actually, you don't need AI for that. And what's interesting is computers can also make that worse. Right? Computers make gerrymandering so much more efficient. So yes, we can have a blind algorithm that just sorts people in ways that look geographically pretty, or we could have a blind algorithm that sorts people in ways that entrench the party in power. It's not the algorithm, it's the people who decide how to use it. But here, I don't think AI makes much of a difference because it's so freaking bad right now, and we don't even need AI. But here, again, it's not the tech, it's the people wielding the tech.
You know, there was a time when I think most people would have said that the arc of history bends towards the increase of democracy and progressivism, and it certainly seemed to be going that way. And if you were pessimistic about that, then you were generally in a minority. I don't think anyone would today say that the survival of democracy is assured. It is something that's coming under attack, and its future is in question, or being questioned in many places. Despite that and the risks of the technology, your book remains remarkably optimistic and apolitical. What sort of examples would you give, perhaps from the past or the present, that reinforce the hope that democratic societies can use AI to deepen instead of dismantling participation and fairness?
Well, I would call out that it is always been the case that to bend the arc towards justice or towards a more democratic society, it takes work. It takes people to bend that arc. And one of the people that we often associate that phrase with, Martin Luther King Jr., of course, was doing a lot of work to bend that arc in the direction that he thought was just. And I think history views that in a very kind light. And it's up to all of us today to try to actively work to use our agency to help bend that arc. Some people, of course, have more power and influence over that than others. What we try to do in our book is to call out the way that every actor in a democracy, politicians running for office, which could, by the way, be, you or I running for a local office if we haven't already achieved some higher vote, how civil servants working in the executive branch, how all of us as citizens can leverage AI as a tool to build our power, to advance the values that we believe in. And I think there are examples throughout the world that show how that can be done effectively. One that we really highlight and we use to motivate a call to action that we have at the end of our book is the Screen Actors Guild, the union in the US that led a strike, a labor action in response to the potential use of AI in Hollywood, in the entertainment industry in the US a couple of years ago. I think the way that they organized around that issue is almost a blueprint for all of us to think about how to react to this moment and to make sure that democracy bends in the way that we want it to. They didn't just oppose the use of AI in a way that would subjugate them within their industry. They did do that, but they also argued for the right for them as creators to be able to use AI in the way that they see fit. And of course, they were also arguing for their underlying equity, the pay and benefit that they needed regardless of what's happening with technology and what's happening with AI. We cast that in terms of what citizens should do today in terms of resisting inappropriate uses of AI in government, forcing responsible use of AI to make government better and to more efficiently serve us, to reform government itself so that we renovate our democracy to be a more effective democratic system for all of us, regardless of what direction the technology goes in.
Well, I thank you. We're coming near the end of our time here, and there are just so many big issues here that we've touched on, and you've talked about things like the possibility of AI being the proxy voter for us to create participatory democracy writ large, and so many things that we could spend so much more time on that we don't have. What keeps you optimistic about the future?
For me, it's people, oddly enough, that, we've had messy civilizations, messy run of us on the planet, but we tend to figure things out. Takes us a while, maybe a world war or two, but we do seem to get it right in the long run. And I think we will here as well. I don't think the robots are going to slave us all or the downfall of democracy. I don't believe in any of those doom scenarios. I think it's going to be messy for a while for a whole lot of reasons, having nothing to do with AI. But I think we will muddle our way out of this because that's what we as a species do.
And my answer is similar. I'm optimistic because I see what it looks like on the ground when government serves people. A lot of my work is around legislative advocacy here in Massachusetts. And I get to see examples all the time of policymakers going out of their way to respond to a request or input from a constituent, finding a way to make a law better, finding a way to help people within our existing system. And my hope is that we can find ways to use any new technology to make that happen better, more often, faster, and to make government more responsive.
Great. Well, closing comments. What do you want readers to remember or do as a result of reading your book?
I think we want them to think about AI more broadly than the news generally portrays it. It's a complex technology, has a lot of uses that are beneficial, that often don't get a lot of headlines. There are risks, there are problems. Understanding the benefits, the risks, the capabilities, the ways it make mistakes, and that this is all changing very, very fast, I think is critical to understanding how this technology is going to be used in the next decade.
I would say for those who are really fearful about AI and skeptical of its impact on society, I know there are good reasons why a lot of people feel that way. And I hope they'll pick up our book and be open-minded to some of the potential beneficial outcomes, and they'll fight for them. And likewise, for those who are really excited about AI and maybe thinking about only the potential beneficial outcomes, I hope they'll also look at our book to see some examples of how things have gone wrong or could go wrong and give serious attention to those as well.
Thank you. We will have a link to the book in the show notes and transcript. What else would you like to tell our listeners about work that you're doing and things that you'd like them to follow?
Everything about me is on Schneier.com. Hopefully the correct spelling will be on the webpage. And right now, I'm thinking a lot about AI and trust and AI and integrity. How do we ensure these systems are actually doing what we think they're doing, let alone whether they're good at it? Like, are they actually doing it?
And you can find all of my writing on the web at nsanders.me, a lot of it with Bruce. And if you're interested in a really interesting example of civic technology being applied to public good, check out our Massachusetts Project for Legislative Engagement, Maple at mapletestimony.org.
Terrific. Well, that is all our time. The book is Rewiring Democracy, How AI Will Transform Our Politics, Government, and Citizenship. Bruce Schneier and Nathan Sanders, thank you for coming on the podcast, and thank you for your service to democracy.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
And that's the end of the interview. Some really fascinating questions there. I mean, the idea of government developing its own AI models, for instance, that alone is mind-boggling in the issues it raises. I think my takeaway here is that there's a lot of ways that AI could improve how we govern ourselves, but it's really up to us to bring our A game and do this properly. We cannot phone this one in. In today's news ripped from the headlines about AI, Extropic Corporation is building thermodynamic computing hardware that is more energy efficient than GPUs. And I mean a lot more efficient, as in up to 10,000 times more efficient than modern GPU algorithms. The preprint paper proposes a new probabilistic computing architecture that uses standard CMOS transistors to implement what they call a denoising thermodynamic model, instead of using monolithic energy-based model, EBM. Multiple simpler hardware EBM layers are chained to gradually denoise noise into meaningful data, similar in spirit to diffusion models, which avoids the sampling difficulties of large, complex EBMs. Heavy stuff, but amazing potential. Next week, my guest will be AGI pioneer Craig Kaplan, returning to the show after just over a year to talk about designing safe superintelligence. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.